What's up, world? This is Maxwell 3000 Productions. I am Maxwell 3000. I want to welcome you to another edition of Family Talk with my pops, Wayne Carter. Pops, thanks again for being here with me.
Hey, I'm enjoying it.
Yes, sir. And so, just to get right back in our conversation, I was reviewing our older stuff, our previous episodes, and it really stood out to me that kind of once this military career thing started going, that your life really took off kind of fast, and you had some really two major moves within 4 years, and the moves may be even a little closer than that, I guess, from Mississippi and then over to North Carolina. And now you're getting ready for another transition and another big move to Maryland. Um, and I kind of wonder, where your headspace is with this because you hadn't really planned for a long military career, and then you had kind of gotten recruited into this program. Um, Looking back, do you recall how you felt going into this stuff, or were you just kind of giving your best foot forward and seeing how things worked out? Do you remember anything like that?
Yeah, kind of the latter. You know, I, I got out of the Air Force and then, like you mentioned, got commissioned to go in the Army. At the same time, I'm wanting to go to law school, and so I'm waiting to kind of figure out how that's going to work out getting into law school. And so the Army's, send me to do some training to become a nuclear, biological, and chemical officer. And and again, my intention, I say this a lot, but it's just the truth. My intention was to do whatever the Army or the military wanted me to do, and I'm going to do it to the best of my ability, but long enough to get through law school because I need that extra money. And so I was going to go be on active duty for this training that several months, uh, and then get out and get into a reserve component uh, unit and be able to do that while I'm in law school. That's kind of what I had in mind, and that's kind of how it worked out, really.
And you said that before, when did you decide that you wanted to go to law school? I know you had talked about one of your advisors kind of mentioning that to you once you were over at Methodist and stuff like that. But when did you kind of figure, yeah, I want to go to law school?
I think that was probably at Methodist, when I was finishing up, and I think I may have mentioned Professor Dr. John Tobler, that was the political science head of that department, befriended me and encouraged me to do that, and suggested that hey, I could do that.
Yeah.
I really didn't know if I had the ability to do it, and
Was there
you know,
something when you were at the university? I know when I was at the university, it was like all of them were kind of trying to recruit you into a field like they're like a corporation. Like, well, this is what you do. This master's program is the next step, or this field is how where you put your resume in with this degree. Was it kind of like that? That this is one of the options. Like political science, what do you do with that degree? You can go to law school. You can be a journalist. You can be an academic, or you can, So what was that part of it too, or?
not really. I think in my mind, uh, had law school not happened, I had the option of staying in the Army. And so I'd have probably done that.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, and so with this shift into the army and really getting ready for another big move, I've got us in the late summer, early fall of 1977. and you're getting ready to go to Maryland, to Edgewood Arsenal as part of the Aberdeen
Yes,
Proving
it's called the
Grounds.
larger Aberdeen Proving Ground Complex. Yeah.
And man, that's just got a really cool sounding name to it. Tell me, what is the Aberdeen Proving Grounds, and what goes on at a proving grounds, and what's the Edgewood Arsenal, and all of that?
Well, a proving ground is simply where they test stuff, military stuff. Uh, uh, and Aberdeen at one point was a big testing or proving ground for tanks, because it was, and I'm assuming stuff, but it was a lot that was a similar type of geography that's Central and Eastern Europe would have been. So that would have been where you would want to test, see how they operate under those type of circumstances and that type of ground. You know, there's a proving ground out in Oklahoma for artillery. Uh, a lot of and in further west, there's a lot of proving grounds for aircraft. And if you think about the geography, it just sort of makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, okay. And you were trained to be a nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons officer. And man, that is just a mouthful.
Yeah.
Break that down as far as maybe into those components, and what the program, as far as your curriculum, what kind of programming, what did you undergo for that?
Well, in the basic course, you know, and I'm going from a lot of memory that it's been a long time ago. But you covered stuff like what would the effects of a particular, say, chemical agent have on an individual. When you look at a symptom, you could say, okay, this was maybe that particular chemical, and how you test for a particular chemical or biological agent. A little bit different nuclear. Another part of that would have been primarily the I think the American military, at least in my perception, at that point, was primarily in a defensive mode. How do we defend against pretty much the Russian attack? We're still in the Cold War era. We're still feeling like we need to help and still do help defend NATO and Central Europe and Eastern Europe. And so, if the Russians or their allies use a particular type or size, called a yield, of a nuclear weapon uh, on a particular piece of geography, how would it affect that geography? How much landmass would it affect directly? And probably even more importantly, what's the downwind effect of that? So that was a big deal. That and chemical and biological to some extent. But biological is really deployed at a little bit different mechanism. And the reason biological is you usually deploy a nuclear or chemical weapon to be a missile or a large artillery piece or aircraft, and it'll explode, and then it'll the nuclear would be a chain reaction. The chemical would disperse chemical agents in a large area, but generally an explosion of those types would kill a biological agent. So biological agents are generally deployed in a different fashion. And those are some of the things you look at.
Okay,
It's really kind of interesting.
that is interesting. Um, what are some of, so give me an example, maybe. I think that we all kind of understand what a nuclear weapon is, and really maybe the effects of that. But maybe what's a an example of a chemical weapon?
Well, you would have particular artillery rounds. I'm sorry, what? Okay, okay, thank you. Oh well, an ambulance came down the road. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
But you would have an artillery round, and the round would be, could be shot out from whatever artillery piece you have, but a round that would be particularly made to carry a chemical weapon. And so, and we particularly got concerned with those things during Desert Storm, and we'll maybe touch on that a lot later. But so when that weapon exploded, it causes a chemical, whatever that agent happens to be, and it
So is
can
this
be.
like the chlorine gas that we kind of hear about? Is that
That would be a that
that's
would be a
what
simple that
a
would be a simple
common
one. That would be a
yeah
very simple one, yeah. But there are a lot more dangerous things out there than the chlorine. Yeah, but
yeah
yes, yeah.
or what and maybe like what like the mustard gas. What exactly was the mustard gas as far as the actual chemical agent? I guess the
Well,
mustard gas is
mustard.
kind of a common name. What does that really
It,
mean?
yeah, it was really just an irritant more than. But there are things like VX and all other types of chemicals out there.
The
That's actually
VX,
been
I've heard of that. Tell me a little bit more about what is that?
well. It's that's kind of one of the things that it would do is if you inhaled it, it would destroy your lungs. It would cause your lungs to have blisters and stuff, and it's an awful death. So.
Yeah. And this might be crazy, but I've just got um this old movie Alcatraz, right, with Sean Connery and
Nicholas Cage.
Nicolas Cage. Yes,
Yes,
and
that
it's
was
all about yeah,
absolutely believable for me. But
yeah.
they were using biological agents. Hold on a second. Yes, ma'am. Okay. Yes, thank you. Uh, let's stop and have a word of prayer for my neighbors down the street. There's apparently something going on down there, and
Okay.
I'll kind of lift that up. Father in heaven, thank you for allowing us to come to you in prayer. I lift up Cliff and that family down there. We don't know what's going on, but it looks very serious, and we lift them up, and we ask that you be with them and give them the guidance and the help that they need in this time of trouble. Thank you for being a God that listens. In Jesus' name, Amen.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Anyway, we were talking about uh,
You're
Nicholas
talking
Cage.
about the kind of the dispersal methods of chemical agents versus biological agents.
Well, and that movie actually was biological.
Okay. All right. And
And
so what and I'm just really ignorant to this. When I think of a biological agent, I don't even know. I almost have an idea of, you know, introducing some sort of a disease to a population to kind of, is that what we're talking about? Or how does that work in maybe a battle plan or a practical wartime application, I guess.
but biological warfare is probably one of the oldest types of warfare known to mankind. Go back to the ancient times when people lived in walled cities, and one of the things that the attacker would do would take dead carcasses of animals that may have had diseases and throw them over the walls and infect the population, and you wait them out to die.
Sure.
Uh, take that fast forward to now, we could put it into water systems, and so that would be a type of biological warfare to include the stuff like was in that Alcatraz movie. I forget the name of it, but the Nicolas Cage and that one. Uh,
Yeah.
so
Okay.
yeah,
That's interesting.
smallpox. You think about how what this, and I'm not sure the Spanish meant to do this, but the Spanish brought smallpox in blankets to when they came to the New World and killed out a large population of the Native Americans.
Yeah. Yeah. is that is that something that is a contemporary threat? I mean, as far as the water system, I mean, you've got to have a breakdown in a few different checks to like just a simple municipal water system. There has to be multiple breakdowns of checks for something to like that to be dispersed. Is that kind of an archaic type of weapon, or is there a modern or contemporary application?
I think it's a very modern application. It's a scary application because once that type of thing is let loose, we don't know how to contain it.
Yeah, yeah. And we could probably get into some science fiction stuff because I
Yeah.
guess you could even get into a newly developed disease like some corona or what have you unleashed on a population and things like that. Um, so that's interesting. So what? So there was a lot of technical training, I guess, as far as dealing with these different types of weapons, right? And then was there? I assume there was some additional officer training that maybe was associated on the maybe a management type end. Is that
I don't
accurate or no?
I don't really remember a lot of other training other than the school technical. There was some extra duty, extra stuff to do, but it was minimal in my memory.
Okay. And how long was the school? How long were you in Maryland?
I think maybe around 6 months.
Okay. And that was the time. All the time that you spent up there was just for that 6 months for the school.
Yeah, yeah, and uh and and we rented an apartment when we were up there. We weren't planning on being there long. We were planning on coming back to Middle Tennessee, and like I said, I was going to get into reserve component and just go from life from there.
Okay. So where do you remember what neighborhood where you lived at? What it was like? What the apartment was
Ooh.
like?
I don't remember the name of it. It was a pretty nice apartment, and we actually rented furniture. We didn't even bring furniture with us because it was going to be a short period of time.
So
Uh,
well, hold on. So what did you do with all your stuff in Fayetteville?
uh, we didn't have a lot of stuff, but what had I kept it at Jim Laverta's. I don't remember if they had a barn but I mean they kept it.
Did
There's
they have the farm over here um, around Tucker's off of Trousdale
I
Ferry or
think they
whatever?
had got that in the mean now. Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Right around that time.
Okay. Okay. That's interesting. I have some iris that's blooming beautifully. That actually uh, my mother kind of stole from that property a few years back. That's something else. So you basically you bring your stuff back to Tennessee and put it in storage, and then what? How were those arrangements made for you? Is there a does the military kind of have that support system in place that helps you find those things? What? How does that work?
Uh, and my memory was that your mother probably handled most of that because but there is military support system, family support stuff, and because it was just she and I at that point, so we didn't have a lot of family to worry about, and uh, and so well, I don't. I'm trying to remember. I know she went to North Carolina and got that going when we went up there. Uh, I'm thinking she went to Maryland, but anyway, it wasn't that hard. I don't think. I don't remember doing a whole lot of. They get you hooked up with an apartment off post, and
Yeah. And so, were you in like an apartment complex, kind of like a complex type of vibe?
yeah, yeah.
Had you was that something different than what you had maybe seen around in the South, or maybe in some smaller communities that you had been in? I guess Fayetteville was the biggest city you had really kind of lived in. Uh,
Yeah,
at the time?
In Fayetteville we had a duplex and then bought a house. This Your mother had lived in an apartment complex when she was in college. She was in college. I guess this was probably the very first apartment I'd ever lived in.
Okay. And was it what story was it on? What was it like? What was this apartment complex like? What kind of was it brick made of brick or what did it look like?
Um, I don't recall it being made of brick. It was fairly nice area. I remember that. Uh, and it was 10 or 15 minutes from where I had to go to in on base or on the post to go to class. But to be honest with you, it was just a lot of studying for me. I mean, we'd go to
Yeah,
class, 8 hours a day, and then had a lot of homework.
I bet that was some heavy material too, right?
A lot of, and that again, that's not my favorite thing to be studying, but in the Army's infinite wisdom, they found out that, or thought that I was some kind of math major. They Math was a big thing in that, figuring all that stuff out and doing equations, and
Sure, sure.
I had to work a lot. And But we had some off time. We went to some Baptist church over there. I remember that, and I remember that they had me, and maybe your mother also. We taught a Sunday school class, and I'm convinced that the only reason that they wanted us to teach it, or at least me to teach it, was because they liked the way I talked.
Oh yeah, that's fun.
Not that I had any knowledge, but it
Yeah,
was Southern dialect.
yeah. What was that like? Kind of going, I guess, up north and being in that little bit different environment where folks don't talk like you do. Was that a culture shock for y'all, or what do you remember about that?
I don't think so. I found, generally wherever I've been, if you treat people decent with respect, you're going to get that.
Yeah.
And I had no problem. We had it's enjoyable times. I remember uh, I got introduced to eating crabs. I never eaten crabs before. Maryland is big about crabs, and I remember, and I don't know if mother and dad were with us or Jim and Laverta or all of them. Anyway, they all at some point came to visit, and so we went to a place called Blind Robin's Crab House. So I remember getting a sticker saying I got the crabs at Blind Robin's.
Uh-huh.
But and I'd never eaten it before. I know you all probably have, but this was a new experience for me. You go in there and it's this huge round table, and there's a hole in the middle of the table. Underneath the hole is this big trash can.
Mm.
And so you order crabs, and I'd never eaten them, but we want to try whatever the locals did. And so I remember the waitress bringing in old newspapers and putting them all over the table. And I said, "Why are you doing that?" She says, "Well, you're going to make a mess when you eat these things." I said, "My mama taught me how to eat. I will not make a mess." She said, "Oh, yes, you will." So they bring this big platter of crabs out there and just dump them on the table. And you got this little wooden mallet and a little bitty two-pronged fork. And it's a lot of work to
Yeah.
get to the meat in a crab.
Yeah.
And so, and you eat a bunch of them, and you got all these shells. And what they did was, after you got done, they would just take those newspapers and push them toward the center in this big hole that went into the trash can.
Yeah.
I thought it was a great idea, but so that was my first experience of eating crabs.
So you were eating crawfish down in Mississippi, and crabs up in Maryland. That's
Yeah,
pretty cool. That's
and
pretty
shrimp
cool.
down in Mississippi. That was a
Well, what else about Maryland? That's kind of a short stay. Um, Was there anything that maybe stood out to you about the school, or any relationships that you might have made with those folks that stand out to you?
Not really. I can remember some of the faces. Probably if I saw a roster, I would remember the names, but I don't really. I mean, it was nonstop studying for all of it. It was three or four of us that studied together in our little group.
Yeah,
There's probably 15 or 20 people in the class.
yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm. And so, where you knew, or you were going to join a reserve component? Did you already have it lined up? Like, what was your post coming out of that? What did you do after you got done with your 6 month
Well,
training?
it was interesting because you're supposed to get into a reserve component unit, and here I'm getting out of there and coming back to Middle Tennessee. Uh, went to Jim Marie's dad was I think fairly influential, or at least was involved in the American Legion there in Lebanon. And so coming out, I remember going to a fish fry that the American Legion put on, and I met a gentleman by the name of Carl Wallace at this fish fry. Carl Wallace was the state adjutant general for the Tennessee Army National Guard, and he and I
That's
got to talk.
convenient.
Yeah, well, and he also owned the Lebanon Democrat, and he owned a paper in Waverly. And I think there was one or two other papers around, the smaller papers that he controlled or owned. Uh, anyway, he and I talked, and he gave me his phone number and told me to call. He'd get me in the Tennessee Army National Guard, and that's how I got into the Guard rather than going to an Army Reserve unit.
Okay, okay. Well, that's interesting. So that's just one big. I guess the next year, the next 8 months, particularly, was really just one big transition.
Oh yeah.
Um, what did you do coming back to Middle Tennessee from Maryland? Where did you go? What town did you move to? What were the living situations? What was that like?
We got back and we bought a house in Smyrna. Uh, and I think your mother was working for, I think, Department of Children's Services or Human Services, or is transitioning into that. Uh, and I started working construction because that's, I'd had that background. Back when I was in high school, and Dad was still pretty big in the union, and so I was easy to get a job, making pretty good money. I
Yeah.
mean, making real good money. And so then I did that, and all of a sudden, boom! I get notice that, hey, you can go to law school, and
What
so
does that mean? How we mean you get a notice that, hey, you can go to law school? What does that
well,
mean?
then I was accepted into law school.
You had been applying. When did you
Yeah,
start applying?
yeah, and uh, I am convinced that the reason I got accepted into law school was because I was a veteran. 'Cause I wasn't that smart. My intelligence is probably average, maybe a little above average. I don't know, but there's a lot more people out there, a lot more intelligent than I am, and my grade point averages weren't that great. I didn't, my junior and senior year at Methodist, I was an A student, but my freshman year at Middle Tennessee was not so great. And so I didn't turn anybody on, I don't think, because of my grades, but I think being a veteran helped me get in.
Okay, okay. So I guess it's what, the spring or summer of '78. You're in the house, and
This would have been the fall winter time of '77, I think. All that's happened real quick.
okay.
Because I think
You went to Maryland, so you had to at least be maybe in the beginning of the year in '78, right? Because you had your summer camp in
that was early summer '77. I went right from there to Maryland and spent
and
the yeah, so,
so right around the end of the year, the turn of the year, you're back
yeah,
in Smyrna.
yeah.
Okay, okay,
And I could have the years, mixed up, but that's around that time frame.
okay.
It was happening real quick. That would have
Yeah,
been, no, it would have been the fall of '78. I started law school.
okay,
No, no. Rachel was born '79.
correct.
It'd been the fall of '79. I started law school.
Okay,
So
okay.
I worked a year or so and doing all that other stuff to before I got into law school. Because
House.
Rachel was born the night before my first exam in law school.
Oh no.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think I want to stop right there because there's a few different things that you've mentioned that I'm going to want to go back on and get some follow up information, and explore a little deeper. So I think that might be a good place for us to kind of break for today, if that's all right with you.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
I do gotta think about that timeline. It is the fall of '79 before I start law school.
Okay. All right. And well, maybe over this week, hopefully, depending on basketball and everything like that, next weekend will kind of determine our schedule, I guess, right now. Um, let's go back and look at, I'm going to go back and look at all of our conversations and look at your notes of your life there, I guess. And I definitely have some more questions, and I want to have the time to unpack them. So I'd appreciate you do it. All right, Pops. Well, I appreciate you again. This has been Family Talk, Maxwell 3000 Productions. I am Maxwell 3000. Peace and love.